This is the Becoming Muslim podcast at untoislam.com, the show that helps people convert to Islam with hosts from the US, UK, and Australia.
Assalamu alaikum, peace and blessings be upon you. I hope you have been well. Welcome back to the Becoming Muslim podcast, a part of the Onto Islam website. Today we are joined by Dr. Gina DeBarthe and scholar Nawal Ali in discussing... Walaikum assalam, Gina. Thanks for coming to the show.
Alhamdulillah.
And Nawal, you want to say hi?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. So I have these two very intelligent ladies here to discuss what happens after we convert and we are confronted with the quote-unquote orthodoxy of Islam. So if you're new to Islam or you're thinking about converting to Islam, a lot of the time, especially in the mainstream media and in certain Muslim communities, there is this one opinion, one line approach that is portrayed that makes Muslims seem like a conglomerate, like a monolith, like we're all reading and thinking the same thing. And actually, this is just not the case. So I think to start it off, we should probably establish what are the quote-unquote orthodox schools of Islam, give some background on what the 6 articles of faith are in Islam, what our basic tenets are that no two Muslims around the world are going to disagree on. So from those to the more gray area stuff, the controversial stuff that, is portrayed as a consensus, usually when someone is giving you their opinion about it, but actually there are so many different ways to look at all of these issues. So to start it off, we'll ask Gina just to remind us quickly of the 6 articles of faith in Islam and the basic tenets that no two Muslims are going to disagree on.
Okay, so I have the 6 major beliefs are the belief in oneness of God, belief in the angels of God, belief in the books of God, belief in the prophets or messengers of God, belief in the day of judgment, and belief in divine decree. So the qadr of Allah. I just like to say qadr.
That's a good word.
It really is.
Very good. And then we're going to tap on Nawal's knowledge of the schools of thought in Islam, and she can give us a brief overview. We know that there are more, but these are the main 4 that you'll hear, especially when you first convert, for opinionated topics.
Yeah, so there's the Hanbali school, the Maliki, the Hanafi, and the Shafi'i. A lot of these schools are more based in certain parts of the world than in other parts of the world. So you find a lot of, more of North Africa. They might be leaning more towards the Maliki the Maliki school of thought. And then you have South Asia, which might be more towards the Hanafi school of thought, the Levantine region, which might be a little bit more on the Shafi'i end. But yeah, it's not that there's really a huge difference in opinion between them on, the majority points of Islam. It's just more of a difference in opinion on certain minor things in Islam, or not even minor, but just things in relation to cultural influence, to environmental influence. And so, one example that I give of that is that in Maliki faith, having a dog in the home is not considered dirty, whereas in the Hanafi or Shafi'i school of thought, it would be considered that having a dog at home is impermissible. And so a good example of, I'm not saying for sure that, Maliki, he was a shepherd or anything, but I can assume that a big reason why in the Maliki faith it's not viewed in that way is because, for example, if you have someone who's a shepherd and really depends on dogs for their livelihood, it would be very difficult for them to be able to do what they need to do, like herding sheep, without having a dog to assist them in their day-to-day life. Whereas I'm assuming most likely that, Imam Shafi'i, for example, he probably was more from the city or from an area where that was not as common. So the difference of opinion stems from obviously his own information on Islam, but also the environment that he grew up in.
Right. So there's that part of it. And then what is the science behind this? So when we talk about where these differing opinions are gathering their information,
Sure.
of course, we have the Quran, which is the basis of any opinion, any information that you want to get. First, you're going to want to get the general consensus from what we get from the Quran, right? And then what do we use to build upon that to get our kind of minute details?
Yeah, so a lot of the schools of thought, I find that majority of their differences of opinion are based on hadith, not so much Quran. There are definitely some moments where they might have a difference of interpretation of what an ayah means, but I find it to be more so with hadith. And the reason why is because in hadith there's a study of chain of narration. So who were the people who narrated this hadith? Who did this person get the hadith from? And who did that person get this hadith from? And in that process, there's a couple of things that they're looking at. They're looking at, number one, so does that hadith contradict with something in the Quran specifically? So if it's saying, go ahead and drink alcohol, obviously we know that that hadith was probably not true and that there was something that happened there, because it's contradicting with something in the Quran which states that, intoxicants are not allowed. And then you have the other is the chain of narration of like, who are these people? Were these people known for being honest people? Were they known for exaggerating a lot? Were they known for lying? So we look at all of those things before we come to a conclusion. And then you have some scholars taking a hadith and saying, oh, this is definitely a strong hadith because we have another person who narrated another hadith very similarly with a different chain. And this is most likely very true. And then you have some hadith where it's like, oh, this is the only chain of narration we have of people stating this, specific thing. And we have no other proof. We have no other proof that it was said. We have no other chain of narration. And so we're going to consider it to be weak. And so basically all of these factors, like the authenticity of the hadith, whether it contradicts or not with the Quran, plus the people and how, honest and sincere they were, these are all factors that go into making a decision on what is and what is not permissible, or what these scholars view to be, permissible versus not permissible, versus like it's makruh, which basically means you can do it, but it's not very liked.
Mm-hmm. So these are just things that are based off of, for example, the Sahaba of the Prophet, peace be upon him, what they saw and they observed, and they said they heard. This is what hadith are, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so the most authentic hadith collections are the Bukhari and the Muslim, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So if listeners wanted to start somewhere, they should probably start there if they wanted to delve into, the more gray areas. So that'll be your foundation if you come across one of these issues or something that we don't happen to touch upon during this podcast. If you're confused, you can always go. There's actually a really great site.
I'm going to say Sunnah.com, isn't it?
Sunnah.com, I think.
Sunnah.com
Yes.
is a really good site. You can look at different hadiths and things of that nature. I think even the Bukhari, my Ustad who teaches Quran, he said that he tells us this story about, 3 guys standing around and one of them saying, oh, no one has like put all these hadith together and some of them are not very good. And someone else was like, yeah, you're right. This is terrible. And then the third person said, hey, you know what? I'll go do something about it. And that was Imam Bukhari.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he did something. And so he compiled the hadiths and from what he said, labeled them as, with the weak or strong or whatever on them. So he's a good source. And Sunnah.com I have used. So alhamdulillah.
So Gina, when you first converted, were there things outside of the basic tenets that you started being told and then they sort of didn't make sense to you, or you didn't find the reason or the logic behind them, and then later come to find out there are all these different opinions on subjects?
There were things, that actually kept me from becoming Muslim originally. Like I had a very close and dear friend who was from Nigeria. When I was in college, we studied together all night. I would she would pray and I would stand at one end of the hallway. I was like her prayer bouncer. I wouldn't let anyone come down the hallway while she was praying at night because we would literally stay up all night and study chemistry. We took all of our chemistry classes together. And she was like, you really need to become Muslim. And she really did some strong dawah with me. And what she said to me, because I sing, and I sing in church. Okay. I wasn't just singing. I was singing in church. I said to her one day, I said, yeah, I'm singing at church on Sunday. And she goes, music is haram. And I was like, what? What do you mean music is haram? I'm singing, praises to God. How can that be haram? She goes, oh no, music is haram. She goes, but it's okay if there's no instruments. So I was like, well, I'm singing a cappella this Sunday. There was actually that Sunday. There was no instruments. I was singing a cappella. So she goes, well, that's okay. And so that bothered me that you couldn't have music. The idea of not having music to me, I started singing when I was 2 years old. I played the piano starting when I was 8. And I was like, how could that all be wrong? It just didn't make any sense to me. And then the second thing that really kind of confused me was I said to her, what if I really want to read the Quran? Like I believed her. I said, yes, I believe the Quran is the word of God. And I believe that Muhammad is his messenger, peace be upon him. I believe these things. I believe what you're saying is true. But I want to read the Quran for myself. I really do. I want to read it. And I said, what if I just read it in English? Because I don't understand Arabic. She's like, oh, no, that's haram. You cannot read the Quran in English. That's not the real Quran. You have to learn Arabic. And then you have to understand Arabic. And then you have to read the Quran in Arabic. You can't read it in any other language but Arabic. It's just haram. And I was like, well, haven't you read the Quran? And she's like, no, I don't know Arabic, so I can't read the Quran. And I was like, well, how do you know what your religion is if it's based on the Quran, but you can't read it? And she's like, well, there's these scholars and I just kind of listen to them and they know what they're talking about. And I was like, oh, well, I have to read the Quran before I can become Muslim. But she was so insistent that was haram that I didn't for a very long time because I didn't want to insult someone's religion.
Wow. So that's so interesting. I never heard that. I mean, I've, run into this attitude that if you read it in a different language other than Arabic and you're not having a basic knowledge of Arabic, that it's easy for you to misunderstand things, which I totally get. Translation is something, it's an art form, really.
Argument. There's so much in the Arabic that's untranslatable and it gets lost in translation and you need to learn the Arabic. And I mean, we discussed together that we were both going to learn to read Arabic and read the Quran, alhamdulillah.
And did that happen? You know Arabic now?
I can read the Quran in Arabic. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, I can read it. I can recite.
Right.
Um,
But
and
for deeper understanding, you
I still have to read
go
the
to the
translation. And
right.
you
Okay.
know, tafsir, things of that nature. But
In your own language, which is
in
perfectly
English, which is
acceptable,
perfectly
right?
acceptable because when I did become Muslim, I discovered, oh, you can read the Quran in your own language. That is
Right.
okay
Wow,
because
yes, if
you
that
know,
is a rumor going around, that is completely false. Please.
yeah, it just I didn't know
Uh,
better. I didn't know better.
yeah, yeah, obviously. And, you take it from that's the other thing as someone looking in or from the outside in, you always assume that the people inside the religion actually know what they're doing. But
Sure, sure.
even in any faith, it's clear that they don't read the Bible. They're just following kind of like what this sister was doing, what the local scholar was saying, or the local
Sure,
church or whatever, and kind of
sure.
leaving. They feel like the Holy Book is somehow, since the medieval ages, it's just somehow only for the learned
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
people who have studied that field. But no, this is
Yeah,
never what
yeah.
the Quran was meant to be. It's a book that's alive. It's something that you're supposed to be
Sure, sure.
um,
And then wearing
connecting
the
with.
hijab was the other thing because her mom, none of her family wore hijab, just my friend. And
Uh-huh.
I went to Eid, um, after the end of Ramadan, I went to Eid to their house, and I said to the mom, I said, "How come no one else wears hijab? Just Ken Hindi?" She's like, "Oh well, you don't have to wear hijab to be Muslim. She's just very religious."
Uh-huh.
So I didn't know for the
Yeah,
first
yeah.
week, I didn't wear hijab. I said to my friend, I said, "Why are you giving me all these cards? Am I supposed to wear them?" Because, I thought that, well, you don't have to wear a scarf to be Muslim. Like, I mean, you don't, of course, but you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, because of the community that you were interacting with. And that's so
Hmm.
interesting and a very important point to note that you may be in a geographical location where your masjid has maybe a lot of Palestinians or a lot of Egyptians or a lot of, like in your case, people from
Yes.
India or Pakistan. And
Yes.
then in this case, their ideas about things like hijab,
Hmm.
um, things like music, things like
Yes.
even henna and nail polish and the little minute things
And
day to
makeup.
day makeup, they'll have different opinions on it. And it's not really based upon particular hadith or even the Quran. It's like a social norm or cultural
Sure,
norm at
sure.
that point. So, yeah, that's a very important point. While hijab, of course, we believe is obligatory because of the verse in the Quran, which states,
Hmm.
a woman should be covering her head and all that.
Sure, sure.
The way that it is worn and the clothes that are used can be diverse, right?
Sure.
So
Very
don't all
much
have to
so.
wear an abaya or a niqab or
Or shalwar
gloves
kameez. As much
or
as I,
or
I love to
shalwar.
wear shalwar kameez. I love
Right,
it. I love it. I'm telling you, I
right,
wore it before I was Muslim. I was just like, so when everyone
right,
wanted to give me shalwar kameez, I was very happy about that. Alhamdulillah.
right. And just to kind of circle back to the music thing. So um, once you converted and you've been a Muslim now for how many years?
It'll be 2 years in December. I have not been Muslim very long.
2 years, mashallah. Well, long enough.
Enough.
So has your opinion on this kind of evolved? Have you done any more research?
I have
And
looked into the research, and I mean, I don't know enough about the hadith to know if the hadiths, if there was some hadith about stringed instruments. I don't know if that's even authentic or if it's weak, but that confused me a little bit because I thought, were there even any stringed instruments at the time of the Prophet? That was my one question, like
hmm
anachronisms.
hmm
But I don't know enough to know. And then there was no specific prohibition when I read the Quran that said that music was haram.
Right. And to our ears as Westerners or people who aren't used to holy books being recited the way it is, the Quran sounds musical, doesn't it, at times?
It really does. It really does.
So
It
that was
sounds beautiful to
also
me, alhamdulillah.
right, inshallah.
But some people
Um,
lose their voodoo if you were to say, you're reciting, you're not singing.
Yeah, right, right. Do you have any input on the music controversy, Nawal?
I think it's from our nature to see things and to basically beautify things and also to enjoy beautiful things. And I think the human voice is no different. People will naturally say they like to hear a woman with a softer voice, a smoother voice, of some sort, versus hearing a woman with a scratchy voice. And I think if for me at least, the whole music thing doesn't really make sense, because what you're basically saying is that things like singing lullabies to your children to make them fall asleep, that's not allowed. And it's like every mother does that, I'm pretty sure.
Sure.
When their kids are young. The Quran, yes, it sounds very singy to me. So, and I used to actually, as a kid, participate in Quran competitions, and it was always the person who had the best voice and the best, who can make, people emotional through their recitation, that, often won those competitions. And I think a lot of what, for me, the only music that I would deem to be, not, halal in some way, is the music that does, rile up your emotions to do, negative things.
Yes,
and
the
I've
wrong
actually,
thing. Yes.
Yes, and I've actually read. It's interesting because I was when I was taking psychology, I was reading about the effects of different types of music. And they were discussing, I don't remember if it was like metal or if it was just general, like hard rock. I can't really remember what genre it was, but it was talking about how riled it gets people in like concerts, and how it ends up causing people to start, breaking things, or, getting a little out of control.
Sure.
And I think, that's the type of music that Islam really, if it does,
yes,
not, listening to music, I think that's the type of music that it's talking about, is the one that leads to this kind of inner emotion of doing these very negative things,
destructive things. Yeah.
And I think, that could be true of things not even musical, like, speeches, that people could give speeches that move people emotionally, and could move people in a way that was negative. Like, I mean, look at Hitler, right? SubhanAllah, he was a great orator, and he gave speeches that moved people, but, you just have to think of the overall effect.
Yeah,
right. And there's also the opposite. Talking about psychology and music, we have music therapy now, where it's proven that the opposite end of that spectrum can actually help heal emotional trauma for people, anxiety, help with the treatment of depression. So Islam in general embraces knowledge, embraces science, embraces what is good for the human heart and human mind, and rejects naturally what is not. We're not going to sit here and promote drinking alcohol, for example. Nobody is, as a Muslim, is going to be like, yeah, it's great for you. We're not the one drink a day crowd.
No,
we're going to say, what intoxicates in a little, intoxicates in a lot, intoxicates in a little, and therefore it's just bad for you, and we're going to stay away from it. Whereas these things like music, it's like, well, it's like the internet or your phone. You could use it for good things, or you could also access bad things. It just depends on the intention and also the result, right?
You kind of know what you're doing. My
there's a
dad at one
nuance.
point said, you know what kind of music I'm referring to when he was talking about music you shouldn't listen to. He's like, you know what kind of music I'm referring to. Because it's really obvious. I think anyway that it's really obvious. Maybe it's just me.
I think the one thing that I've definitely noticed in the Muslim community that is very much so lacking is number one, people actually having the right knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So people focus so much on, people about, converts learning Arabic to be able to recite in Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
But when you ask majority of those people, especially I can say, like with the Pakistani community,
Sure.
when you actually ask how many of them actually understand what they're reading, it's
Mm-hmm.
really not there. So there's so much of a focus about reciting in Arabic, but not
Mm-hmm.
about really understanding
Mm-hmm.
and what it's actually saying. And I think there's so much hypocrisy in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part of it is really viewing things through a context. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's also very much so lacking in the Muslim community.
Mm-hmm.
I've met multiple communities that, for example, my cousin was sending her son to a after school Islamic studies program.
Sure.
And majority of those kids were not going to school. They would just
Mm-hmm.
they would just go to this after school program and read
Mm-hmm.
Quran all day, all afternoon long.
Wow.
And they were trying to become, like Hafiz, like
Mm-hmm.
Hafaz, to
Mm-hmm.
memorize the
Memorize.
Quran. But like some of them just didn't have, they didn't have basic knowledge of like how to do math or how to read English. And I mean, this is in America. I'm talking about in America. So, and the parents, I remember my cousin talking about when she would talk to the parents about this, like, your kids need to go to school. They need to have other knowledge of like math and science and, English and this and that. The whole thing, the whole argument that they would always have is that's not, Islamic knowledge. So we're not going to waste our time with that, even though it's so emphasized for us in Islam to learn how to read and write. Anyways, the point is that, I have noticed that there being this very deep obsession with this one thing of like, no, like this is what's important and like everything else is not important. And this is a really big problem with the Muslim community. And the other part of it, as I said, taking things out of context. So, you talked about alcohol. Yes, alcohol is haram. But, when people go into surgery, they need, a numbing agent or an intoxicant to kind of, calm the pain down, or else it's brutal. It's unnecessary
Right.
pain and it's unbearable.
Right.
You
Yes,
know,
and I
so
think this is also when you get into medicine and things like that, you also have the controversy of gelatin in medicine, and yeah, as you're saying, like either even cough medicine I've heard because it has like that minute bit of
I did
alcoholic
hear
content.
about the
Some
gelatin
of
thing.
it,
Yeah.
yeah, and there's I've never heard an opinion where it's like no, you can't get anesthesia. Have you
Mhm.
heard an opinion like that?
yeah, I have.
Oh,
I've heard
really? Wow.
SubhanAllah, you have really?
Subhanallah.
I've heard you can't have from certain very strict, kind of masajid and, well, if you even want to call them scholars, I have heard, them say like morphine's not allowed, anesthesia is not allowed. And, I find it to be very controversial because, as I said, I do believe that, one of the main things I've learned about Islam is that everything has a context. Every single thing has a context.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's hadith where, the Prophet talks about killing, and it's like you would say, well, murder's haram, but he's talking about it in the context of war.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have
Right.
hadith talking about, like Khalid bin Walid, he used to eat lizards. That was like one of the things that he would eat is like lizards and snakes and stuff. And those animals are considered to be haram for us to eat. But he would have to eat them because he would go on these really long treks through the desert and there was nothing else to eat.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to find there? Like, you're not going to find a cow in the middle of the desert to eat.
I think that's one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was going to say, I think that's one of the most beautiful things about Islam, because even the things that are haram, I mean, we were discussing this earlier, like pork, for example, if you were like in the middle of nowhere and the only thing you could eat to survive was pork, you'd have that allowance, because in this case, the balance of the pro outweighing the con has shifted, right? So you always have to use your reason. This is like one of the major things in Islam. If you're not using your reason, I don't know what you're doing, kind of things.
Mhm.
So that would apply to the surgery, because I mean, if you're having a
Right.
life-saving surgery where if you don't have the surgery,
Exactly.
you're going to die, then then you have to have the surgery, you have to have the anesthesia.
Yeah.
And to that point, it's also, I've also heard some women be like, oh, I can't go to this surgeon or this doctor because it's a man, or vice versa. But if it's out of necessity, if this is the person who can get you the result to you feeling better, you're not going, it's not going to that person because they're the opposite sex. You're going to that
I've heard
person.
that too. Yes.
Yeah, you're going to this person because they're the expert nearby you. It's the feasible option for you, and Allah knows best. You're not trying to expose yourself. You're trying to help yourself.
Yeah, you're not
So,
there for that reason. You're there because they're a specialist, and that's the person you need to see because they have that knowledge that you need in order for you to be healthy.
exactly. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
we've
Yeah. On
shifted
that.
gears. Oh,
Mhm.
sorry. We've shifted gears here a little bit because we could have some of your background, Nawal. You were born a Muslim and kind of like veered away for a while and then came back once you did your research. So maybe a brief, like 1-2 minute of how that came to be would be a helpful context for
Mhm.
people listening.
Yeah, I think I grew up in a very strict household. My mother was not really Muslim. She grew up in a pretty secular household. So it was very normal in her house to drink, to have premarital relations, to kind of wear whatever you wanted. That was how she was raised. And my father, he never had a strict upbringing, but I think he over the years became strict due to just whatever political campaigns and environmental kind of background he had while he was growing up. And I think there was also this very deep fear of my mother's influence on us. So his way of kind of making up for that was being very strict on us. And
Mm-hmm.
all I can say is over the years, I've competed in, as I said, Quran competitions. I used to go to Islamic school every single day, 5 days a week after regular school, plus on Sunday. And I was very deeply immersed in it by force. I wasn't allowed to join ballet or soccer, anything, because those were all wastes of time. And eventually it did really cause a lot of hatred, internally for me. I basically at the age of 15 made a decision I didn't want to be Muslim anymore. And I left completely. And it wasn't until I had the opportunity to travel and I actually met scholars and people of knowledge who had, really spoken from a place of, and I always say this, that, there's people who speak from a place of like arrogance where, if you have a different opinion, it's like they take it personally, because they don't want to hear or have any change. And then there's people who speak about these things from a place of just, here are your options, or this is what I know, and you can decide for yourself. And I think when I had more of that approach, I began to really appreciate Islam and understand it in a much better way, because there was so much more leniency and me actually being able to think for myself. And that's, I think, another important thing to mention, is that we all don't have the same environment. We all don't, go through the same things. There are women out there who, are single and have to raise like 4 kids, and, they have to do all these things. And it's just not going to be practical for a woman like that not to be able to travel because she has no man to escort her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
yeah,
then,
I have heard
Right.
about that one. I am wondering about that one. Just,
and then there's other, you know, situations where, you know, a woman might have, mashallah, like 10 brothers, like great for her, you know, and a father who's supportive, and an uncle who's supportive, and a husband who's supportive, you know, and she has that ability to travel with someone. And then that's great if she does. But I think, you know, as I said, you know, time and time again, Islam, even within the main, you know, principles of Islam, the main schools of thoughts and everything, there's difference of opinion. The
Right.
Prophet said, like, he had on multiple occasions displayed this diversity through the way he dressed, through the way he spoke, through the way he, you know, when he would meet people of different cultures and different, you know, from different countries, he would, you know, maybe react and talk about different things with them, or, you know, interact with them in a different way than he would with his own tribe.
Of course.
It's really interesting because there's like hadith that even talk about, there's like a specific hadith that talks about that when the men, I think it was like the men of the Quraysh, that when they were married, the women of the Ansar, that the women of the Ansar would complain because for them, they would have sexual relations differently than the women of the Quraysh. Like something just basic as that, you know, that they didn't like the way, you know, that their like sexual relations would be with the men of the Quraysh. So, you know, and the Prophet actually, you know, like basically just things like this, you know, the basic things that you would, you know, that are very actually cultural based. We need
Individualistic kind of things.
and individualistic and all these other things. And that's why there's so many, as I said, schools of thought, because we are supposed to be able to have, a choice, and we are supposed to be able to have we're supposed to be able to have a personal relationship with Islam, is what it really is. And so
we're supposed to, be able to have these conversations and respect the diversity of opinion and see the point in the other, not, you know, be like, oh, haram, you're not Muslim anymore.
Sure.
When they disagree with us. You know,
I think teacher. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I had a teacher who said one time that different isn't necessarily wrong; it's just different.
Yeah, I think that should be the basic attitude, because like we discussed in the beginning of the show, sure, we all share these basic things, but then in our individual lives, and Allah knows this best, you know, we have so much diversity in life. It would be crazy to think that there were only one right way to do something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just kind of curious, back to this whole topic. I don't know, is travel too controversial? What is this thing about traveling? Like, inshallah, I plan on going on Umrah in December. And I'm going with a group, but I mean, there's going to be a point where I'm going to be traveling on a plane by myself with, you know, I'm a single mom. I don't have anyone who can go with me, subhanAllah. It would be nice. It would be cheaper.
Right.
But I mean, with COVID-19, for example, you can only get a double or triple room if you're related to the other person. So, yeah.
As far as traveling alone, I personally have not looked into it enough to.
Because I heard someone tell me, if you're a woman, you're not supposed to travel alone more than 3 days, and I was like, but I travel alone all the time. What are you talking about?
Nawal, you want to jump in here? Do you have anything?
Yeah, and well, for that specific topic, I personally think it's okay for women to travel. When you contextualize why, you know, women were asked to not really travel alone, you will actually find that it has nothing to do with hadith, but actually it was more in relation to, I think it was Umar ibn al-Khattab who actually decreed that. So it was not really based. And the reason why he decreed that was because when women were traveling alone through the desert, they were actually being, at that time, they were being like kidnapped,
Oh dear.
robbed. So he basically said, it's better for them to travel with men to take care of them.
Yeah, that makes sense, to protect themselves.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah,
But
that's a
we
different
live in
thing.
a very different time, so
Mm-hmm.
no.
Right. So it kind of
Okay.
doesn't really apply anymore.
So, of course, I love to read and recite Quran, and there seems to be this like I keep hearing about this. My ustad keeps mentioning, more women need to recite. Women reciting is a wonderful thing. It's a good thing. But yet I keep hearing this other sort of background noise of, not from him, but from other people saying, oh, women shouldn't recite in public because a woman's voice is, should be covered, or what's the word, aura or something like this.
Yeah, it's part of her aura.
It's
I've
part of her
heard
aura,
this
but then I heard other
argument.
people say, no, it's not. It's perfectly okay for a woman to recite in public. And I admit I have recited in public.
I
Alhamdulillah.
think this is one of those things that have been blown out of proportion too, to be honest with you, because now, and this falls under the issue of hijab as well, because there's this whole debate, and usually it's a bunch of men debating with each other about what a woman's aura or hidden parts, I guess you could call that. What would you say,
Sure.
Nawal? How would you translate this?
About what aura exactly is?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a combination of, the physical, hiding the physical, and also, preserving the internal
Mm-hmm.
as well. So
Kind
I
of
do.
modesty, idea of
Sure.
modesty, sort of. So, I've dealt with this issue personally. As a hijabi, I only usually wear like a turban style, and a lot of scholars will say, you have to cover under your chin with a scarf in order for it to be like quote unquote real hijab. Of course, if I saw the evidence for this myself, I would wear it in a certain way. The way I wear it I usually wear a turtleneck or something all the way up to my neck, so that this is what I'm comfortable with. And I feel like it's, not part of my aura, my neck or whatever. And I feel the same thing about reciting and a woman lecturing. And we have so many examples, from the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, of the women in his life being part of public life. So I don't see an issue with women reciting. I think, of course, the intention and the way in which it's done it is on an individual to individual basis. I personally don't have a problem reciting, and I would prefer, it just be my voice and not my whole self. But some other people, I think there's a famous one, isn't there? An American Jennifer
Gruett. I met her.
Yeah.
She's very nice, and she came through Islam through music. Kind of going back that way.
Ironically, huh?
Ironically, to Morocco. She was studying like Arabic music, and that's how she came to Islam. And I went and saw her recite at one of the masjids, and I remember in the ladies' halakha, the lady who ran the halakha said, "Oh no one should go see her recite because she's reciting in front of men. She's reciting.
She's not wearing niqab in front of men.
So she's like, oh my gosh, a woman reciting in public. This is haram." Anyway, I went anyway and sat in the front row. They had a divider down the middle of the masjid because there were so many women that they couldn't all stay in the room where women usually are. They had to come out into the place where the men were. And so they just put a divider, and I sat in the front row and listened to her recite. And she did a wonderful job, alhamdulillah. And I did ask her to.
She's beautiful, yeah.
And she does music as well, still, because I asked her about that. And she says, well, I gave up music for about 3 years, but then I just couldn't not be a musician. I had to go back. And so, in her opinion, it was okay that she was a musician. SubhanAllah.
Well, and if you think about it logically, would you prefer people to be Muslims and listening to music or producing music, or would you prefer them to be non-Muslims and doing these things? You know what I mean? Like what is the pro con? It's better for them to have that belief than to believe that they can't be part of it because of one of these gray area issues. And as far as women reciting goes, I know it's controversial, and it's actually not very common. Like, it's very hard to find
Sure.
recitations by women, especially public ones.
Sure.
And
Mary
I think
Spears
it's
other ones that I like as well. So
it's very sad. I think it because part of the power of the Quran is its beauty, and women have some beautiful voices to be able to draw people, with that power. And sound has magic in it, or not magic, but sound has power, for lack of a better word.
There's a beauty in there. There's a healing. There's a healing in the recitation. The vibrations of it, I feel are healing, and
science.
There's a whole science behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
both for the reciter and the one receiving the recitation. And this is part of the basic faith. You are supposed to be reciting, whether publicly or privately. So I definitely think that's a norm that needs to shift back. Because
I think it does too, because a lot of the greatest reciters even learned from women reciters.
Right.
My teacher learned from a woman as well. He points that out. And I kind of question the person who is having, if someone were listening to a woman recite who was having the wrong kinds of thoughts, I would kind of wonder more about them rather than the person who was reciting, right? It's like,
right.
What's up with you?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have any thoughts on that, Nawal?
Well, I've discussed that, the wives of the Prophet, they used to teach men after the death of the Prophet. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with, women being teachers to men. And, as far as I said, with recitation of the Quran, I think we naturally are more inclined to listen to that which we find beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yes, alhamdulillah.
Were there any other things that you wanted to bring up for people who are thinking of converting or newly converted that you ran into, Gina, personally, or maybe Nawal, something that, turned you away before we close out on this diversity of opinions topic?
Well, I found it fascinating, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. One of the things that drew me to Islam was the whole moderation. Like, as a Catholic, I was very torn about certain issues like abortion. It was, the soul's there the first day. Abortion is completely wrong. It's murder. You're going to go straight to, AG double hockey sticks. But yet in Islam, that is not the opinion. It takes a moderate view, really. So,
and nuanced view,
more nuanced view,
right?
Because the woman's mental health, physical health, these sort of things are taken into account, whereas especially in very conservative Christianity, not in the more sort of, because there are some Christian denominations that say yes, it's okay to have an abortion, but in some very conservative Christian faiths, that's just it's just murder. That's it. And there's no way around it. But in Islam, saying that the soul doesn't even come into the fetus till like maybe the most conservative view was 40 days, right? And then up to 120 days. I don't know all the details. I think Nawal, you know more about that than I do. And the exceptions for the health and well-being of the mother, which is generally what's been reflected in most of the abortion laws that are current. Of course, that has been changing and become more conservative to the point of being almost not being able to have an ability to have an abortion, like the law in Texas, which restricted it to 6 weeks. So 2 weeks after
Yeah,
you miss your period, basically.
right, right. Yeah, I think Islam is more scientific about it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And it's on a case by case basis, and with all these gray area issues, there is reasoning behind any opinion, and so you can always go back and say, well, is this based on hadith? Is this based on superstition? Is this based on history? Like, why is there this widely held opinion? And
Sure.
for the most part, you're going to find that's what they are. They're our best guesses at what Allah has intended, right? We don't have the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, here to ask. So
There I call them hypotheses.
yeah,
Because
it's
that's
like
what a
science.
hypothesis is.
Yeah,
Hypothesis is a best guess. It's not,
it's our
science
best guess.
doesn't prove anything. It's a best guess.
It's what we've observed. It's what we think works best. Exactly.
Yes. Alhamdulillah. And it could be some of it,
Oh, of course.
We're willing to revise those things.
I'm sure, some things that we've said throughout the program, some other people will find scandalous, and that's fine. That's what I'm talking about. In Islam, you should be able to find your group of people. And even within that group of people, there will be issues that you're just going to not agree on. And that's okay, because we believe that every person is held accountable for their own actions.
Yes.
Regardless. So
don't lose your wudu so easily.
Yeah, the small issues, that's what it is. So the point of the show is to let converts know, or people thinking about converting, that there are so many issues that have so many different opinions on them. And even, outside of the four main schools, you can find scholarly opinions, well-respected scholars, might I add, who aren't traditionalists. And it's up to you to kind of make your way and build your faith based upon reason and knowledge and all these good things. And it's important to know that Islam is not a monolith. So if one Muslim says something to you, it doesn't necessarily represent all of Islam or the thought process of a whole community, because we're so diverse.
Yes. Alhamdulillah.
In closing, Nawal, you want to add anything, or is there anything we missed?
No, I would just say more so, it is really important for us to look at these opinions and really contextualize them. And then also, Islam is unlike, other religions where, maybe you're just listening to one person and that's it. Islam is also about, having your own personal relationship with God and also relying on people of knowledge to guide you. So it's a balance of both. It's not, I'm not saying go and cherry pick, but what I am saying is that, and I'll just give you a very basic example. I grew up in a very abusive household. My father and my mother, both of them, used to beat us pretty severely. And I mean, just to contextualize what I mean by severely, I have permanent spleen damage because of the beatings that my parents both gave us. And when I was going to SHU in the past and talking about this, they would tell me that I had to respect my parents. I had to basically that I couldn't basically free myself from them because it would be going against Islam. And this is a lot more of the closed-minded scholars that I'm talking about. But eventually, when I traveled, and this is after I left Islam and I kind of found it again, I spoke to someone and they said, Islam talks about, care for the self.
Sure.
And care for the community and the family. And, a lot of cultures especially Eastern cultures,
Mm-hmm.
they like to throw that, you have to respect your parents bit,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a cultural identity that children have to take care of the parents,
Mm-hmm.
and that you have children for the sake of taking care of the parents
Sure.
in their old age.
Mm-hmm.
As Westerners, we kind of don't have that. We
Mm-hmm.
literally just, we're very individualistic.
Sure.
And
Although I did get that a lot growing up from an abusive parent. You have to do what I tell you to do because the Bible says honor your mother and father.
yes.
Yeah.
And, just from, obviously my physical health, my mental health, everything was deteriorating. And even when I eventually, left my household and I ended, basically being adopted by a relative, but I still was, visiting, and I was still interacting quite frequently with my parents, and still suffering that abuse. And it wasn't until, I got very severely ill that I made the decision that I can't, my physical and mental health couldn't tolerate it anymore.
Sure.
And if it wasn't for the fact that this, one sheikh who I had spoken to actually really took that area of like respecting the parents
Mm-hmm.
and really contextualizing it to the point where he was like, yeah, this applies to like parents who, also you can, that you can have a relationship with, and they're not physically harming you.
Mm-hmm.
And so respect is so subjective, right?
Sure.
Respect could also mean just calling them just to check in once in a while, and just not talking to them harshly. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in their presence all the time. And I think that experience really, I truly believe that, if it wasn't for the fact that he had the knowledge that he had, and he was able to, offer me that knowledge, I would still be in the same situation that I was in at that time.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah, and that's why I do think it's very important to find people of knowledge who can explain things to you and not just give you blatant, generic, kind of statements.
Like tropes.
That don't make sense.
They're tropes.
To your situation. Yeah.
Exactly.
They don't make, yeah. They're not tailored. No, for sure.
Yes, and who can offer you options, and not from a place of cherry picking, but from a place of, so that you can make the best decision for yourself.
Sure. So you don't have to expose yourself to more abuse. Like, you can love your parents and say, I love them, and you can respect them, but you don't need to open yourself up to more abuse, especially if they're going to continue abusing you.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, I would just state that, Islam is very diverse. We have certain priorities of caring for ourselves, caring for our community, caring for our family. But we also, if you're not well, you can't really do anything for others. So you need to be able to feel content within yourself, within your beliefs, within your, whatever it may be, in relation to yourself, before you can, do all these things that your community or culture are asking you to do, and you're not even really, it's not even 100% the truth,
Sure.
It's not based on Islam. It's based on what people think. Yeah.
Yes, it's what they think is Islam, because they were told that, and so then therefore they just believe it.
Yeah,
perhaps, So I'm sure.
Very, very wise advice.
I think it's true. I think we all have, cultural. Baggage. I don't know, baggage is for lack of a better term. We're just not aware of it. Like, we all have our different cultures. I had a friend of mine visit me one time from Germany when I was in my 20s. We had been friends in Germany. And when she came here, she started pointing out to me all the things that, to me, I didn't even realize was part of my culture. It's like, oh, I never really thought about that. And then I realized that there were things I was doing in my life that had nothing to do except with that's just how I had been taught to do it. And that there were other ways of doing those things, but I had just not been exposed to those things. And so I didn't have knowledge of them. So I only knew what I knew. But just the
Mm-hmm.
awareness that just because I don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't exist really helped me expand. It gave me the
Very
ability
big
to
deal.
expand my mind, to be aware that there's other things out there I just don't know.
Well, it's
Does
like
that
the
make
old
sense?
saying goes, oh, yeah. I mean, we have a cliche based on that. The more you know you don't know, right?
Exactly.
Uh, with that in mind, thank you, ladies, for joining us for this very enlightening episode. It's been a pleasure. I hope that the listeners have gotten something out of this. Again, if you're thinking of converting to Islam or you have newly converted, please, please, please keep in mind that everything has a context. The more you know, the more you'll see how wide the scope is to practice. Be a practicing Muslim within your own life. It should fit your own life. It shouldn't obliterate your old life completely, right?
Yes, you're still
so there's
you.
a way for you to be Christen in Islam. There's a way for you to be Gina in Islam. There's a way for you to be Nawal in Islam. You know, and we all shouldn't be carbon copies of each other. And it's this diversity that is really going to strengthen the community and allow for more people to be comfortable within Islam. And in all things, Allah knows best. So keep your Quran close. Use all the resources. We have so many great resources today, especially digital ones.
Oh, yes.
To further your understanding if there is something that is confusing you or contributing to, mental health degradation or something like that in your life. Know that that is not the aim of Islam, and it's likely you need to seek another opinion. So, as always, thank you for joining us. This has been another episode of Becoming Muslim. We truly feel blessed to have you with us, and inshallah, you will have a blessed day. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be upon you.
Wa alaikum salam. Rahmatullah barakatuh.